3 disturbing quotes from famous serial killers. I took the right leg of that woman's body, from the knee to the hip, took the fat off, and ate it while she stared at the other girl. When I bit into it, she just urinated right there. Arthur Shawcross. When this monster entered my brain, I will never know, but it is here to stay. I can't stop it. The monster goes on, and hurts me as well as society. Maybe you can stop him. I can't. Dennis Rader, BTK killer. I remember there was actually a sexual thrill. You hear that little pop, and pull their heads off, and hold their heads up by the hair. Their body sitting there. That'd get me off. Edmund Kemper.
Don't get me wrong, the new Willy Wonka movie looks fine, but there's no way it's going to be as dark as the original book. We're talking dark enough to not make any cut of any of the movies. Also, I cover stuff for the darkly curious here, and if that's you, you might like the podcast. So in all the movies, we see the Oompa Loompas as these singing, dancing, unbothered henchmen of Willy Wonka's. But in the book, they are so much darker than that. In the book, Oompa Loompas are pygmies from Africa that Willy Wonka kidnapped and brought to his factory. Look at this passage. Once Willy Wonka realizes that they'll work for beans, he shipped them over here, every man, woman, and child in the Oompa Loompa tribe. It was easy. I smuggled them over in large packing cases with holes in them, and they all got here safely. But the book came out in 1964, and at that point, slavery had been abolished in the UK for almost 160 years. So rightfully so, people were not happy with this portrayal. But this is just a good reminder that Willy Wonka is the villain of these movies. He's a curmudgeon shut-in with Peter Pan syndrome who invites children to his factory to watch them die. And then he acts as if you're the one annoying him. Anyways, this one looks very light and fluffy and not that. I bet you didn't know that the original Barbie was based on an R-rated German escort doll. My page is all for people with dark curiosities, and if that's you, I think you'll like the podcast. Okay, so in the 1940s, there was this very provocative German cartoon called Build Lily. And Lily was described as being a gold-digging call girl who would seduce wealthy men. And mind you, this is the 40s, so this is really dicey for the time. Here's Lily joking about taking her bikini off in front of a police officer. So by the 50s, they make a doll version of her that's like a gag gift. It's even dicier and more inappropriate than the cartoon was, and men loved it. They just basically gave it to each other. So around this time, Ruth Handler, who's one of the co-founders of Mattel, is traveling Europe. And she sees the slutty Lily dolls and she's like, oh, girls in America will love this. And then in 1959, she debuts Barbie at the New York Toy Fair. You can see that Barbie is just a spitting image of Lily. And apparently Ruth knew it too because she bought the rights to Build Lily and she put them out of business. Just something to remember when you watch the movie this month. Barbie was based on a girl who was way ahead of her time.
This man claims to have seen his deceased sister. He says that 3 nights ago, he suddenly woke up, and what he saw terrified him. He said that when he looked up, he saw his sister sitting at the foot of his bed, just smiling at him. The only thing was, his sister died 6 years ago from a drug overdose. He says he was so in shock that he was just staring at her. He said that she was almost transparent. Suddenly, as he was looking into her eyes, they turned black. He said that he turned as fast as he could to his lamp and turned on the light, and when he looked back, she was gone. He said that this all happened in probably about 5 to 8 seconds. Afterwards, he woke up his wife and told her what happened. He was in tears. He couldn't stop crying. He said that his wife checked the foot of his bed, and she told him that it was still warm, as if someone had been sitting on it. He says he knows what he saw and that he wasn't dreaming. And he doesn't know if this was really the ghost of his sister, or if it was something pretending to be her. He said that he's lived in the same house for about 2 years now, and they haven't had any paranormal experiences that he can remember. He says the only thing that's different now is that his wife is pregnant, and ever since she's been pregnant, he's been having strange dreams of his sister. This was just the first time that he saw her when he wasn't sleeping. He says that most of the dreams have been pleasant up until this moment. In his dreams, he'll just hear his sister singing like she used to, and he'll also have dreams of them playing soccer like they used to when they were kids. So what do you think this means? Could this have been the ghost of his deceased sister? Or do you think that this was something pretending to be her? Let me know in the comments down below.
My little cousin killed me during an Instagram live in front of her followers. She turned the gun on herself. I am Quarren Harvey, and this is my story. My name is Harvey. I'm 14 years old and I live in Missouri, United States. On March 25, 2022, it was a Friday night. My whole family was gathered to celebrate several birthdays. There were my parents, uncles, aunts, and all my cousins. Everyone was happy, dancing, singing. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, my 12-year-old cousin, Paris Harvey, and I decided to gather in a room away from our parents. We settled in the bathroom. We grabbed some drinks and food and started talking. Before having the same idea of starting an Instagram live, we were brainstorming ideas to make our life screen interesting. My cousin had an idea and went to fetch something from her parents' room. A few moments later, she was playing with the firearm. She found it amusing to aim at me. It made her laugh, so she continued. And accidentally, she pulled the trigger thinking it wasn't loaded. She killed me in shock. A few moments later, she turned the gun on herself and also took her own life. Our Instagram followers witnessed this horrific scene without being able to do anything. The live stream kept going. Our parents, drawn by the sound of gunshots, entered the room and discovered our lifeless bodies on the floor. Their screams of horror were heard by everyone watching the live stream. Within a few days, these images circulated throughout social media. Today nobody knows what truly happened. For my family, it was an accident and not a murder. If you would like to support us and hear the stories of others, please consider follow us.
This is why you might not want to go out in the wilderness alone at night. Reddit user Corey777 writing was out with a group of buddies in the middle of Kuna, Idaho. They were all having a bonfire together, but Corey said he was feeling down that night, so he decided to unload his dirt bike and go for a ride, alone. Corey says that he probably rode about 3 miles from the bonfire until he reached a small hill. He says he was just hanging out, sitting there for about 45 minutes. And he said that he was 100% sure he was alone up there. There was nobody around. From time to time, though, he started hearing what sounded like laughter coming from far away, until eventually it got closer and closer. He said it sounded like 2 to 3 people. It wasn't constant, but he would hear it every 5 minutes or so, and every time it was getting closer. He started to get a funny feeling that he wasn't alone after all, so he decided to get back on his bike and get out of there. When he hopped on his bike, it wouldn't start, so he started to get a little bit scared. Eventually, he was able to get it running, but it didn't want to stay running, and it kept dying, so he had to keep revving it to keep it running as he headed back towards his friends. He says the whole time that he was headed back, he was really scared for really no reason. He had a light bar mounted onto the front of his bike, so he could see at night. Somewhere along his ride back, he started seeing shadow figures to the right side of him, in the corner of his eyes. But then, they would disappear. Eventually, he made it back safe, and nothing else happened. But he says that he knew there was something out there that night, following him, watching him. He didn't think much about it until he heard his buddies, when he got back, start talking about skinwalkers in that same area that they were at. Corey says that he feels extremely lucky that he got out of there safe that night. He says he doesn't know who was out there or what was out there with him. But he says the laughter, the bike not wanting to start, the feeling that he had, and the shadow figures are all things in common that he heard from other skinwalker stories in the area. He said it was a strange night that he'll never forget.
My wife cooked my body and served it to our children. My name is John Price, and this is my horrifying story. I am the father of 3 children when I meet my second wife, Catherine Knight, in Aberdeen, Australia. I am happy in this new household, although I am aware of Catherine's past. She was born in a dysfunctional environment, particularly with questionable sexual education given by her parents. In school, Catherine was aggressive towards her peers and never learned to read or write. At 16, she starts what she calls her dream job, working in a slaughterhouse. I know that she was violent towards her ex-husbands and her own children. She even tried to throw one of them under a train. She has also assaulted numerous people and animals with axes and other unusual objects. Despite all this, I move in with Catherine in 1995, but I refuse her marriage proposal in 1998. As revenge, she films objects she claims I stole from my workplace, leading to my termination after 17 years in my position. I decide to kick Catherine out, but a few months later, I agree to resume the relationship, although I refuse to live with her. In 2000, Catherine stabs me, and I permanently remove her from my life. I then obtain a restraining order against her. On February 29th, I tell my colleagues that if I don't show up to work the next day, it means Catherine has killed me. Unfortunately, my intuition proves right. Indeed, I lose my life on the night of March 1st. That evening, even though she has no right to be at my place, Catherine sends my children to a friend's house for a slumber party. I spend my evening at a friend's house until 11 p.m. and then go back home to sleep. While I'm asleep, Catherine sits in front of the television, takes a shower, and forces me to have sexual intercourse. I fall back asleep, and Catherine strikes me with 47 knife wounds. I try to escape, but she chases me throughout the house, and I die a few minutes later after managing to get outside. Several hours after my death, Catherine hangs my skin and boils my head and other body parts in a pot with potatoes and vegetables. She then sets the table to serve my flesh to my own children, taking care to indicate their names. She also leaves a note accusing me of violating my children, although it is false. Later on, Catherine takes medication and is found alive on the floor by the police. On October 15, 2001, during her trial, Catherine pleads guilty but refuses to take responsibility for her actions. She is ultimately sentenced to an incompressible life imprisonment. She is the first Australian woman in history to receive this sentence.
Named Oscar Muller hears a knock at his door. He opens it to find one of his neighbors telling Oscar not to use the bathroom on the first floor. Oscar asks why, and the neighbor calmly explains it's blocked up with guts. Naturally, this piques his curiosity, so he walks upstairs, opens a bathroom stall, looks inside the toilet, and sees crimson-colored water and the remains of what appears to be an animal. He calls a local plumber who inspects the bathroom thoroughly, but he makes a different conclusion. These are definitely not the remains of an animal, but rather a child. Joachim Kroll is born April 17th, 1933 in Poland during World War II. He's the youngest of 8 kids, and his family, like many other families at this time, are suffering from extreme poverty. Joachim's father is taken as a prisoner of war by the Russian army, leaving him and his 7 siblings with a single mom. He's seen as the weak link of the family, both physically and mentally with his IQ of 76, and he's also the only one in the family that can't read. This causes him to struggle immensely in school, where Joaquin's forced to repeat grades multiple times until eventually he decides that he's had enough. At age 15, Joaquin drops out of the 4th grade and begins working full-time with his mom on the family farm. It's there that he sees a pig being slaughtered for the first time, and this experience deeply changes him, but more on that later. Joaquin then begins his first romantic relationship with a girl, but she's very critical of him, so he sees it as a complete failure. He then starts obsessing over death, because you can't criticize someone when you're dead, and it becomes an integral part of his sex life. At around the same time, in 1955, Joaquim's mother passes away, and this tragic event, coupled with his morbid curiosity, sends Joaquim down a spiral of very concerning behaviors, and it starts with blow-up dolls. He has countless of them, scattered all throughout his apartment, and at first uses them how they're supposed to be used, but eventually he takes things even further. He already likes the fact that the dolls don't move or speak, but it's strangling them that really fulfills his dark, twisted desires. Just 3 weeks after his mother's death, Joaquim lures a teenage girl to a barn under the premise that he's giving her a nice gift. He then strangles the poor girl to death and subjects her body to unspeakable acts that become signature aspects of his future killings. Joaquim's next known murder takes place 5 years later in June 1959 in an almost identical fashion. However, this time he takes pieces of the young girl's body parts, wraps them up, and cooks them for dinner. These 2 killings spark a murder spree that spans over the course of 20 years and result in the deaths of 13 women ages 4 to 61. The murders all have similar details and consist of Joaquim luring women to a remote location, strangling them with his bare hands, and doing whatever he pleases with their bodies post-mortem. However, in the case of 13-year-old Petra Gies, he uses the girl's own scarf to take her life on Easter Sunday 1962. Also, just 4 years later, he drowns 5-year-old Ilona Hark by holding her head underwater in a nearby stream, simply because he wants to know what it feels like to drown someone. This all comes to an end though on July 3rd, 1976, when police receive a call from one of Joaquim's neighbors, Oscar Moeller, who tells them the waste pipe in his apartment is blocked up and he and the plumber have an idea of what's been blocking the pipe. When police arrive on scene, they too recognize that the remains inside the toilet are that of a young girl. Coincidentally, a local neighborhood girl has recently gone missing, so when police go to Joaquim's apartment to investigate, they're stunned to see the body of 4-year-old Marianne Ketter cut into pieces. Some are in the refrigerator, some are in the boiling pot that he's actively cooking, and many are in the waste pipe. Now, I want you to think back to the beginning of the story. Joaquim literally told his neighbor that there are guts in the pipe and proceeded to be cooking them at the same time. Just a reminder that this man is not the brightest, and it is shocking to me that it took police this long just to find him. Joaquim's arrested and immediately confesses to 13 other murders and 1 attempted killing over the past couple decades. And when asked why he's cutting off portions of his victims and eating them, he simply claims that he was doing it to save on his grocery bills. After being forced to demonstrate the killings through a series of haunting reconstruction pictures, Joaquim Kroll is charged with 8 murders and 1 attempted murder. In April 1982, he's sentenced to life in prison but dies just 9 years later of a heart attack.